A lot of us have a lot of beliefs that are keeping us stuck, possibly, of the things that happen to me will always be with me, and they likely will. And there's still healing that can be done. And you can still make choices that can shift or change the way you experience your current reality.
Psychology Today's definition of self-sabotage is when you create problems in your daily life that interfere with long-standing goals. The most common self-sabotaging behaviors include procrastination, self-medication with drugs or alcohol, and forms of self-injury such as cutting. But guys, I gotta be honest, this definition is actually rather extreme. What about the type of self-sabotage we may not even be aware we're doing? The death of 1,000 cuts. When you tell yourself you're gonna start eating healthy, come Monday, it's on. But since it's Friday, I may as well spend the next 3 days eating everything in sight. After all, I don't start till Monday, right? Self-sabotage. Or what about when you want to meet someone? You find someone you like, but hang on, they don't check all the boxes. So what's the freaking point? Your expectations are so high that they just can't be met. Self-sabotage. But guys, fret not. Today's guest, the holistic psychologist, is back to help us not only identify the patterns of self-sabotage, but give very tactical tips on how we can sabotage our self-sabotage. The woman who is empowering millions of individuals around the globe to be the hero of their own life by healing themselves. Dr. Nicole LePera. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for having me back. It's always an honor to chat with you.
Oh, girl, such an honor to have you back. Where I want to start this conversation is with a quote of yours. Our minds seek the familiar. Repeating the same behaviors is called a pattern, which comes from childhood conditioning. We repeat what we know. So I kind of want to just start from the beginning. If that is true, how do we start to identify what patterns we have developed from childhood that are not serving us?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually got chills hearing you reread that just because of how powerful that just statement is. And then I think when I answer the question, experiencing that statement is incredibly powerful. So what do I mean by that? Observing yourself. So I can sit here and say, you know, we're patterned, we repeat everything from our lifestyle habits, you know, the things we do first thing in the morning, how we go about our day. I could tell you repeat thoughts that we get very repetitive. We tend to tell ourselves the same narrative in our head, most of us, all day long. A lot of us now are really familiar with the phenomenon of thoughts producing emotional reactions in the body. I think most of us, I know myself, I've sat on a couch, had an anxiety-provoking thought, you know, worried about something happening, typically something not positive happening, and I myself at least have thrown my body into a complete reaction. I would start to feel panicked. So a lot of us are repeating the same emotional experiences too. And the way we identify that is we watch ourselves, observe yourself. The large majority of us are in autopilot all day long. We wake up and we don't really consider the choices that we're making through the day. That part of our brain, those of you who are familiar with my work probably hear me go on and on about the subconscious. That's where those patterns are stored. So when we wake up, pay attention to how many choices you're making for yourself that day. Or is your autopilot determining your day to day? And chances are you are conditioned. You are repeating those same patterns, even if you intend to do differently.
Okay, that's amazing. So how do you do that without judgment? And then how do you know the David Foster Wallace quote, be like water? My audience are probably sick of hearing this from me, but it's the story where there's an older fish swimming one way, there's two younger fish swimming the other. The older fish goes, well, how's it going, boys? How's the water? The other small fish keep going. One of them turns around and is like, what the hell is water? And the point being is that when you're in an environment, day in, day out from birth, you don't even know it exists. Right. So knowing, let's say, these thought patterns and these assessments that you're making have started from the beginning, how do you actually identify, in fact, even that it's a pattern and not just matter of fact? And then how do you do that without judgment?
Yeah, the judgment part, I think, is the piece, Lisa, that we all struggle with. I kind of universally speak of a critical voice in our head because I quite literally think quite universally, we all have that. We all sit in judgment of ourselves. I'm better than you, I'm worse than you, good, bad, all of those words come from that ego space. So it's a skill, it's a practice, and it's going to be difficult. Especially if you know you're someone with that inner critical voice, your habit is going to be to sit in judgment. So I just like to voice these things because I know a lot of us can become very self-judgmental when it doesn't come naturally to us or when we do see those judgments being cast. So we want to practice just viewing them as they are. And I talk about the childhood and the wounding and the effective conditioning because I think a lot of us do judge ourselves. A lot of us have maybe been through a lot of therapy, have been through a lot of self-help, might even consider ourselves really insightful. We might essentially know better, but yet we can't execute the choices to quote unquote do better, if you will. And then we start to assign judgments on ourselves. I'm broken, I'm not meant to change, I can't get better, this isn't the life meant for me, and really the list goes on. So learning, I think, how to shift that, learning how to just view things objectively as they are, and understanding if you are someone who's stuck in that conditioning, that it's not actually a sign of something being wrong with you. It's a sign that your subconscious is functioning as all of ours do to keep you safe, to keep you in that familiar place.
All right, so let's do a real world example, because you're 100% right. There's a massive difference between knowing something and then doing something. We can know all the information, but doing it, our emotions get involved, right? The judgment gets involved and it just stops us. So you're a psychologist, you know exactly how to work your mind, you know the tips and tools, you're still obviously evolving. And so how do you then, let's say Nicole wakes up in the morning and goes, okay, this is tough, the situation of the world. I know what to do. I don't want to place judgment on it because I know that doesn't serve me, but I'm still not feeling it. Like, actually take me through those steps of what it looks like. Nicole opens her eyes, has the negative thought, and what?
Yeah, absolutely. So this question I want to make some room for individual discernment.
Thank you.
Because I'm never going to say universally, work through it. The language I often use, what I define, the thoughts of not to do something or the feelings, that come up when I go against my familiar. Mm-hmm. When I try to activate in a new direction or make a new choice, a lot of us do get that endless litany of reasons why not to do this new thing. Some of us might feel uncomfortable actually in our bodies. We might just not feel like ourselves as we're making these new choices. Those I call resistances. And again, they're the messengers from that subconscious that should we choose to listen to those resistances, before we know it, we are back in that familiar rut. That's how it keeps us safe. You will never hear me universally say, ignore the resistance and do it anyway, because I don't think that universally applies to every situation. So I'll use myself as a prime example. I wake up and there's a difference between mornings where I just it is that old resistance. I just kind of don't feel like it, though I can activate and make the choice against that otherwise. And then there are different mornings where my body doesn't feel like it. I'm emotionally exhausted. In those circumstances, I do urge the individual to honor their intuition or their inner knowing, the part of their body that's saying, you know what, that new choice isn't for me today. I'm actually going to surrender into maybe what my body needs today. And it's not getting up at 5 a.m. and going to the gym. Maybe this morning I do something different. That's the end product goal though, is to get so in touch with ourself, to learn often, as I still do myself, through trial and error, to learn what my body and my emotional and my energy signals are, to know and be able to differentiate whether or not it is that resistance. And this is a moment where if I actualize this new choice, right, I can keep myself moving in that future self direction. Or if this is a moment where, you know what, I'm going to honor my body or my emotions right now and make the choice that my need is telling me in that moment.
And how do you then make that distinction specifically? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes after doing the work for some time, right? That comes after building a foundational connection to myself. For me, those of you who know my story know that I was completely dissociated for a very long time, meaning I wasn't connected to my physical body, so I couldn't hear its needs in any given moment. I wasn't connected really, nor did I know what to do with my emotions, my emotional, my energetic body. I was more or less, I was one of those people who learned from the book maybe how to teach others and when it came to my emotions, I really, really struggled. So for me and in my healing journey, like a lot of us need to do, I took a lot of the steps to rebuild that balance, to learn how to be conscious, to learn how to connect with my body, to sift through and differentiate the different signals. So it didn't come overnight. However, now I'm at a connected enough place that I can start to make sense of the feelings that I'm having, whether or not they're in my physical body or in my emotional body. So again, I know I'm not giving specifics. As you do the work, you tend to fall into that connection. And I think that's what we're all looking for. Most of us are looking to find our way back home, to figure out what choices make sense for us. And we live in a world where there's endless opinions and there's endless information now and there's endless tools. And now I think we're all tasked with the individual, responsibility to find our way, to find the way into the tools and what works for us, to empower ourselves.
All right, so once let's say you've observed the patterns, how do you start identifying that it's linked to childhood trauma? And then also even just childhood trauma, I heard you talking about like, it isn't even just like the super dramatic, massive things that happen in life, right? Like obviously extremely horrific, sexual abuse, things like that. But I've even heard you talk about just certain things that your parents have said to you that created a certain belief system in you that you took into adulthood. So can you talk to me about that, break it down, and then how do we start assessing that it started from childhood in order for us to unwind it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the study that you quoted, as the intro here, I think it happened in the 90s-ish. At that time, the way trauma was defined was in those, it's in the field referred to as big T, right? The instances of abuse, physical, emotional, sexual, neglect. And there was kind of, I think, seven questions, and you get a score based on how many yeses you have. This is amazing. We need this in the field. This was the first time, as surprising as it might be for so many people, that it took till the 90s for us to say, hey, these things that happen in childhood carry these negative effects into adulthood. So we're really grateful on the one hand that we finally have this documented. However, I think that definition is much more limited than can be helpful for most of us.
Right.
And I'm one of those people. Because when I meet something like the ACEs scale, or when I learned about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is typically the diagnosis that goes along with checking those boxes on the ACEs scale, I think I score maybe a 1, which is very, very low. It's not one of the higher numbers. So someone like myself, and I think there's a lot of us, especially in the self-healers community, that was really confusing to me, because I see that I'm not scoring high enough to really necessitate that I should be struggling in any way. And I know for a very long time, I have extensive experience. I worked in substance recovery facilities. I've worked with individuals on the spectrum, right? So I have worked with people who score very high on the ACEs, yet there was a striking similarity that I would see in the patterns that I was living, whether or not they're just in my day-to-day, in my thoughts, in the way I felt, definitely in my relationships. And I would see the same patterns in those who were scoring really high on the ACEs. So for me, for a very long time, I had a hard time making sense of what the hell was wrong with me.
Do you think it invalidated you then?
I think a lot of us would feel like something's broken or something's wrong, or I'm just excluded. And maybe there's no language, put it that way, for what's going on with me. And the danger there, or the risk there, is that we do tend to assign these then global, not so positive evaluations. I'm broken. I just can't achieve that thing. That's not meant for me. I'm stuck with these symptoms for my lifetime, right? That sort of generalized language, the more you repeat that to yourself, the more you become stuck. So a big part of my work, you'll hear what I talk about, and I've coined it, or I refer to it, I should say, as spiritual trauma. All of the other ways that I believe, and one of the major reasons I call myself a holistic psychologist now, is because I believe there's an interconnection between our bodies, our minds, and I believe a soul, that indescribable thing that makes us human, that none of us can really put our finger on, though I feel like in increasing numbers, we're all kind of resonating more and more with that. And in that area, I believe, is where a lot of trauma occurs. So when our young soul comes to our family of origin, whatever that might look like, and whatever, tucked in country of the world that is, I believe quite universally, all of our souls as humans seek three things: to be seen, to be heard, and to have the space to just express as is. And I think that's the area where a lot of us, weren't born in environments that allowed that space, had an accumulation of experiences where we didn't feel seen, we didn't feel heard, we didn't feel our reality was validated. And then again, we stored those in our subconscious and we continue to repeat those patterns. And it can cause a lot of the same symptomology of dissociation, of medication and numbing, with all of the ways that we do that, all of the ways we cope, in my opinion, often are born out of those very early spiritual wounds. So I'm a very big advocate for expanding definitions of trauma, for understanding, that you might not be checking the boxes of the big traditional things that you thought, could cause you to continue to struggle in ways that you still might be struggling based on those past experiences. And so just something else I like to offer, because if you're like me, I have very limited memories of my childhood. I can't close my eyes and kind of review like a movie my past. So to speak to your question of how do I know if it's based in my childhood or not, when I speak about my lack of memory, I do get asked a lot, what if I don't have memory? What if I can't see the moment in time in my past or know that pattern originated there? I don't believe you have to, because I believe your conditioned behaviors now are a reflection of that. So the question you really want to ask yourself isn't where did it come from and do I need to know where it came from to unpack it? It's how is this serving me now? And if it's no longer serving me, now I have other tools that I can begin to make choices to begin to use and develop new habits.
All right, so how did you then identify, because you said, I just thought I had a bad memory. And I even heard you say in an interview that you just assumed that people in your family's got Alzheimer's, that's maybe just you. But in researching, going deep in yourself, you started to realize, actually, no, that was just your, I don't know if you use this word, but kind of like a survival mechanism to just forget the past. So how did you even break that down so that and I understand it's not a one for one, but just so that people can start to notice, oh yeah, I actually thought that about myself, based on what she just said, maybe this isn't just me. Maybe this is something that I've developed and I really need to look at that.
Yeah, I think anytime we see ourselves repetitive,
okay,
right, that especially in situations, and I know we all can identify those, where whatever we're doing in that repetitive fashion isn't translating to the results that we want, right? If each time this conversation comes up and, I react in one particular way and I get this reaction or repercussion, if you will, and that doesn't work for me, yet I can't stop, that's usually an indicator that we're kind of stuck in that autopilot. So for me, it wasn't an aha light bulb moment. For me, it was very gradual. It was beginning to use different tools. So for me, it was simply realizing how unconscious I was. Oh, consciousness, great. Okay, so I've learned I first learned what does it mean to be conscious. Okay, being conscious means being fully present, being in a moment, having my senses activated. Okay, first question to ask myself, how often are you in that state during your day? And my first answer was, I'm not. So now I know I don't really know what consciousness is like. So until I begin to practice that new habit and settle into now a more conscious life, now by contrast, I can understand consciousness versus unconsciousness. So a lot of us have to begin to action, I guess is the way I want to simply answer this, to break those habits, to give ourselves new lived experiences, to be able to understand, right, which was that remnant of the past and which is the future that I choose to walk toward.
Wow, so when you say senses, do you literally sit there and go, all right, what am I hearing?
Yes.
Let's tune into my hearing sense. What am I smelling? Let me tune into that. Do you kind of just take it one by one and just really?
Yeah, absolutely. So listeners who don't, yet know kind of how conscious or unconscious they are throughout their day, we all walk around with cell phones. Best suggestion, just set an alarm on your phone for random times throughout your day. So you might not even remember by the time the alarm goes off. And when that alarm goes off and my alarm's going off, first ask yourself, where was my attention? Where's my attention right now that, I hear this thing and now I might zap back in to the current moment. Where was it? Was I worrying about the argument that I had with my partner in the morning? Was I maybe worrying about what's happening tomorrow? Was I like me somewhere else, but I don't really know where I was? And then when I do identify that I was somewhere else, as a lot of us will, using your senses, doing exactly like you said, they can be incredibly what we call grounding. Because when I'm activating my senses, I've now moved my attention from wherever else it was, and I've brought it back into my physical body, entering the present moment, activating the prefrontal cortex, an actually different part of our brain from that subconscious that was probably calling the shots until you tuned in. Firing that up, we know that neurons that fire together wire together, right? So we're almost giving ourselves some mental training and then making it easier to access that conscious state in the future. So yeah, using your senses, ask yourself, I'm touching a nice pillow right here, right? I'm touching, I'm smelling, I'm feeling, and now I'm conscious. A lot of us probably will shift right out of that consciousness very quickly if we're used to being in that unconscious autopilot, which is why I say it's a practice. We have to, over time, gradually, every chance we can make that choice when we notice, oh, I'm somewhere else, to come back here and know that every time you're doing that, you're helping your brain to make that your more easy to access state.
I love that. I mean, it's so tactical, and I'm such a huge fan of tactical advice, because we can get lost in our emotions in the moment. So having that is very extremely powerful. I now really want to talk about trauma bonds, what they are, how they show up. And I hear it so often, right? That it's the bonds that they have with people, that people, whether they can't find a partner or find a partner but they're not happy with, like, please share your wisdom.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason why I'm always talking and people really resonate with the concept of trauma bond, Lisa, is because we're interpersonal creatures. We need other humans. A lot of times I do see my work being misinterpreted when people believe that when I speak the concepts of self-healing, that I'm part of that message is on an island away from other people. And I just want to clarify, self-healing means gaining the supportive relationships around you, learning how to be in your authentic self and be connected authentically with others, because we need others. We all need other humans. And where our trauma bond conditioning began was from those earliest of humans. It was, for many of us, the caretakers. Humans, I believe, might be the only species that is in a state of complete and utter dependency. Meaning, when a human infant is born, it cannot live on without at least one other entity caring for its, here those words come again, physical, emotional, and spiritual needs. Most other mammals, right, can care for themselves. If they're a certain, age of gestation, they can live on. We cannot. We are completely in a state of awe, in a sense, when we're just infants. We are learning, we are absorbing. Our brain waves are actually firing in a particular kind of frequency that allows us to take in everything around us. We're learning, essentially. And so what we're learning is how all of those needs happen in our body and how to get them met. And because relationships are so important, we began to enter into dynamics with the people around us, specifically to keep ourselves connected and safe so that we can ensure that our next set of physical needs get met, our next set of emotional needs get met, and that we are seen, heard, and expressed to the best of our ability. So now we begin to form bonds, kind of arrangements with our caregivers. And those are the ways that we can replicate showing up into adulthood. So those of us who didn't have that space to self-express, to just be who we are, who maybe heard things like tone down this aspect of yourself, or maybe who had a mother who shied away when you were sad because they themselves can't handle sadness in themselves. They probably weren't taught how to cope either. Maybe you have a parent whose spirit is completely constricted. They're not self-expressed because they're trudging along in survival mode, caring for their family. That parent might have a hard time holding space. Very well-intentioned parent, don't get me wrong, right, might have a hard time holding space for your spirit and its self-expression. So before we know it, because that bond is so important, we begin to sacrifice those parts of ourselves. We become the helper, the caretaker, the fixer. We learn how to continue to show up in that relationship to get our needs met to the best of our ability. We're very adaptive, so we begin to make those adaptations. We maybe begin to assume those roles, and then that becomes a framework for how we relate to others. Then before we know it, we're in school and we have little peers. And then this is where the patterning starts, right? We become then that little helper student in the classroom. And then before we know it, flash forward, right, we're the helper adult. And we continue to show up in these very constricted or restricted ways, continuing to keep ourselves from that full self-expression, maybe even continuing to do our own needs a disservice, maybe putting other people's needs before our own. And that's what trauma bonding is. Essentially, simply, it's those repeated patterns of relating to others specifically that were formed in childhood that, for the most part, aren't allowing us to fully express all of our needs.
All right, that was an amazing breakdown. So now, let's say you're in a relationship, and typically, at least for me, before I started getting in the whole mindset space, it was like, oh, it's them, right? It's their fault. It's them.
Yeah.
But then once you start to self-assess, you start, at least for me, I was like looking at, okay, well, what's the common denominator, right? Okay, I'm always getting frustrated in relationships. Okay, well, that's a me problem. And it's so powerful to identify what that issue is and then work on it. And I've heard you even say, like, when you and Lolly started to be very open with each other about what those traumas bonding were, you then could approach that relationship at least understanding each other's, so that when they act in a way that may trigger you, at least you understand where that's coming from. So break that down to me. How did you get to that point? Because that's so powerful. It's not even just like get over your freaking trauma bonds, right? You're not saying that. You're actually saying identify the trauma bonds in yourself, but also I've heard you say about your partner so that you guys can work together. That was so powerful. So break down, how do we actually do that?
Yeah, and I get questioned a lot, you know, what happens if we do identify that we're in a trauma bond? Is this doomed?
Right.
Most of us adults are in one. This also applies, just to make clear, to friendships, to any dynamic.
Yes.
Anytime we're me and someone else, I too was someone who pointed blame. I blamed all of my previous partners for the language I would use is their emotional unavailability.
You would say that about every partner.
It's you, you're not emotionally available to me, you're not emotionally available to me, until I came to realize I wasn't emotionally available to me. So how can I wasn't even being emotionally open, honest, transparent. I didn't know my emotions, nor did I really fully share them with someone else. So how can one emotionally connect?
How did you come to that conclusion?
So how I came to that conclusion is I watched myself in all of my relationships. Okay, Nicole, if you're having a hard time connecting with people, let's see, where are emotions? Do you bring emotions to friends? When you do, what do they say? What do they do? Where's the disconnect? It didn't take long before I realized, no, I'm not bringing emotions to people. I'm not giving anyone an opportunity because I don't know what my emotions are. So if we watch ourselves, again, if we see a pattern that's across all of our relationships, chances are it's not all of those people. Like you said, what is the common denominator? I want to emphasize too, two people create a relationship, right? So either party too is playing a role in the trauma bond that's probably precipitate or continuing. So the person on the other side is probably replicating their own past dynamic as well. So can you heal trauma bonds? Absolutely. You know, it takes a lot of honesty. A lot of times the honesty happens after the fact, after the argument, after the escalation, right? After my emotions got out of control, when I can have access to my prefrontal cortex again to look at it from a different angle. And what I came to realize, and this is the case with Lolly and I as well, there are a lot of times when the way you cope in an activated moment or a partner copes to keep themselves safe or to regain safety oftentimes triggers another person. Right. So the quick example I'll use is what we call in the field withdrawal approach. So we have kind of two people chasing each other. So when Lolly gets emotionally overwhelmed, she shuts down. And so the way she shuts down is she either needs to stop the conversation, the emotional, aspects of it, or leave the room, go take a walk. That's, again, her nervous system is in overdrive and she needs to come back into her safety before we can continue the conversation. Having an emotionally avoidant mother, all these are sounding familiar, right? Oh, emotionally avoidant mother. I picked emotionally avoidant partners, right? I was emotionally avoidant myself. So this is how you start to picture, put all these pieces together. My emotionally avoidant mother, her lack of emotional connection to me was my first abandonment. So when Lolly needed a moment at the start of our relationship to regain her safety and her grounding, that was probably the most painful thing that could have ever happened to me in that moment. Because I'm having a feeling, and when you leave, that's that earliest wound that I had in childhood. So what I would do is scream and yell and run after her, making her flee more into
Right, because that's her.
Because she's now escalating, saying, why are you chasing me? I'm unsafe. And I'm saying, you're making me unsafe by leaving me. And now we're locked. And that's really hard to break, because in those moments, we're both in that emotional brain, and we're both typically, both partners or whomever they are trying to regain safety. And again, it becomes complicated when two different people are having two different tactics and they're triggering each other in the midst of it all. So obviously a lot of work later, a lot of both of us starting to understand our escalation points so that we both can start to say, hey, this conversation is starting to feel like it's escalating me into a point of, not feeling safe anymore. Can we put a pin in this now and revisit it later? Sometimes that's the tools that we need to choose as this is evolving, learning ourselves, and when we need to regulate or take steps to regulate ourselves, obviously communicating that to our partner so that they don't feel abandoned in that moment, and then revisiting the conversation at hand later when we're in a different part of our brain.
Wow, I love that you ended on the communication, because that's going to be an important part, is communicating what is happening, but also it has to be both sides. So what would you have done actually if you were just okay, these, I'm going deep, I'm looking at these trauma bonding, but Lolly wasn't? Do you think that would have been a breaking point if you were willing and your partner wasn't? Because I'm just trying to project some people that are listening, right? Where it's they clicked on this video because they want to hear from you, they want tactics, they want tips, they're thinking about it, and for them, it's they're willing to do the work. But what if their partner isn't? Would you say that it's really difficult then to both be aligned and have a successful relationship?
So two things could happen. If you're with a partner, right, that doesn't believe they need to do the work, that isn't doing the work, whatever. I get asked a lot, how do I make, partner, wife, friend, mom, change, do the work? And unfortunately, I always give the disappointing answer, which is that you can't. Healing is so individual. It takes so many choices, so much awareness on a day-to-day basis that you have to internalize the process and do it for yourself, or at least show up for yourself in making those choices daily. So you just can't. Doing your own work, oftentimes, like I said, one or two things can happen. As you work through your conditioning and developing consciousness and creating new choices, sometimes the thing that were issues, you navigate them differently. The climate in the relationship changes. The dynamic shifts gradually just by proxy of you being different, that those things aren't necessarily issues, anymore. And or you come to the clarity that the relationship maybe isn't the relationship for your future. That's something you'll know as you evolve into this. This isn't a choice I don't think you make when you've deemed your partner not willing to do the work, because that beautiful space of change can happen and does. So my family, for instance, who I think when we spoke last, I was not speaking with them.
No, you weren't.
So I, for those of you who aren't aware, I think for about 2 years, I ended up putting up the ultimate boundary, essentially, coming from a codependent family, and I went no contact, and we're now back and repairing relationships with my family. I know that there's some beliefs that my family has and that my parents in particular have that are there. They are what they are right now. So with that said, I know how difficult it is to show up and to navigate relationships. I also know that now 2 years later, the person that while I was still challenged, right, while those old habits are right there, especially when you walk into that family home with the dynamic more or less still in place, right? I'm like, oh, it's really tempting. I know I'm different now and I'm empowered. So when I go home and I experience them, I actually experience them differently, even though some of their beliefs are still there and they haven't changed, if you will, in some ways. And I want to honor all of the changes that they have done. So I can relate to that. It doesn't bother me as much anymore because I'm in a different space. So a lot of your own work could trickle into your relationship and just shift the way you experience it in a way that makes it more sustainable.
Oh man, I still want to go down the rabbit hole of how you dealt with your family. What was that preparation? Because I project, right? Everyone projects. So I'm projecting, you've armored up. And as I was using that word in my own head, I was like, that's the worst freaking language to go and like welcome your, or like join your family with open arms if you're telling yourself you're armored up. But I kind of think that I would, right? I'd almost run through every scenario of all the things they're going to say. I would repeat how I will react, like, so that when I get there, I'm not surprised. How did you then, if you had, let's say, set a boundary, you weren't seeing your family, now I want to embrace my family, I'm going to go back. I know they're doing some work, but they're not there yet. What did that preparation look like? Because I assume, again, projecting, I assume there may have been some fear that you would slip back into the old Nicole.
Yeah, absolutely. So the major reason that I made one of the most difficult decisions to cut off contact was based in that fear of slippage. I had tried so many versions of putting different types of boundaries in place with all family members that weren't effective. That for my own self, because I do come from very codependent conditioning, meaning worrying about everyone else's needs before my own. If they feel some kind of way, then I'm to tend to that feeling regardless of how I feel. And I repeated that pattern, over and over again. So cutting them off or making the decision to go no contact for me was to clear out that space. And it was almost a 2-year period that I felt I needed. When I went into no contact, it was with a question mark. I honestly didn't know what and when was going to come next with them. And I was just made the promise to check in with myself, to feel my way. So after about 2 years of me just doing work consistently to heal, to identify my physical, emotional, spiritual needs, I started to get that inner ping of, family. Things were starting to come up for me that I was considering opening that door. So I knew, right? I got to the point where I'm now willing to kind of see where they're at. And I had to have many conversations with myself about the boundaries, because I was still fearful a little bit that, okay, well, now that they're back in, I was afraid it was going to be a slippery slope into those old behaviors. So I had many moments where consciously I just had to continue to coach myself through to show up. What I noticed, and this is what's interesting, that thinking of, how are they experiencing the fact that I didn't respond yet? How are they experiencing that I told them I'll call them next week when it works with my schedule? How are they experiencing, they're probably mad. They're probably upset. I would actually talk to them. And everything I imagined, I'm like, hi, Mom. She's like, oh, hi, how have you been? Nothing that I imagined was the case was. So time and time of doing that, I realized, wow, Nicole, you're really projecting all of that past and all of the ways you imagined they were, or maybe did experience them to be in the past, into the now. And every moment you're having an interface with them, a text, a call, you're not getting confirmation. They're actually happy to hear from you. You have your conversation, you put the phone down, and you more or less can keep it moving on your own, in your own world. And so I taught myself along the way that I can't listen up here. I have to watch what I'm imagining and how I'm imagining they're receiving this new space. That's essentially what I'm doing. Can I relate to them and have a little bit of space, still have them in my life, so not no contact, but have more space than I did in childhood that's comfortable for me? How do I do that? What do I do in the space became my awareness. And when I'm in that space and I'm holding space for them, if I'm imagining them from that past self, I'm doing us all a disservice and I'm causing myself stress, because I realized I was having problems with the space. I don't actually know how to be in relation with them from a distance. So I'm finding my way. And I think the teaching and the lesson that I'm sharing is my mind was projecting a lot of those past stories. So I have to take responsibility for that. And the language I use with myself often, whether it's my family, my friends, the community, I want to hold space for their future self. Because I've had so many people on my journey that saw a version of me that I was capable of that I didn't yet see, that helped me along my way. Even in the beginning, if I wanted to punch them in their face, and I think this is a lot of the challenge. So somewhere in our conversation today, seeing that meme that triggers you, or having that moment where a feeling comes up, can really, really be a learning experience in a lot of ways about ourselves, about that conditioning. And the more we can hold space for, and it can come from that place of, oh, I don't want you to see this future me. You seeing that scares me. My promise to myself, though, is to hold that space for my family included. So to always show up and to try to allow them to show up differently as we all continue to find this new version of a relationship that's more workable for all of us.
Wow. There was one thing that you said that I really want to touch on, is you said, now then I can take responsibility for it. And I was trying to think, I was like, how do I ask this question without people actually getting pissed off or annoyed at me? And I was like, you know what? I just have to be me and saying, hopefully I've proven, I dedicate my life to empowering women. So hopefully that's a proof to everyone watching and listening that my intentions are very pure when I say, how do we stop using our childhoods as an excuse for how we show up today? And I mean that in the most, like, I don't want to beat people up, because it's not necessarily an excuse. In fact, maybe it is a reason, whatever word you want to use. But sometimes I really do think, like, if I'm having a discussion with someone and they're like, oh, but this happened in my childhood, it's almost sometimes I've noticed people use that as a reason to act the way they act. And it'd be like, well, you've just got to accept it because this happened in my past. How do we stop using that as an excuse?
Yeah, I like that. It's a really great question. And I think the more we can incorporate a 3-letter word, and, into our life, the more we can become flexible and let things be this and, right? So yes, a lot of us experienced things when we didn't have choice, we didn't have power, we were very young in our childhood, and they, as we now know, as our full conversation today, they carry effects, on our physical bodies and our nervous systems, our emotional bodies, our spiritual senses of self, the way we show up in the world. Yes, and as an adult or as a maturing individual, right, we still have to show up in responsibility for the choices that we make. So, and I use that word and I've broken myself of the but habit that a lot of us do, right, where we exclude, well, this happened, so that makes this impossible, or et cetera. Yeah. And the more and sometimes we just train ourselves with language. Notice in your mind, how many times do I say, but this, and we can just regiment and the more we make space. So I had really painful things that happened to me, and I'm maybe stuck in a trauma body, in a trauma bond. I'm stuck repeating these patterns of emotional reactivity. Perhaps my nervous system is even completely dysregulated, making me very understandably feel like I have no control. And as an adult, there are possibly some tools out there that I can begin to implement, one small daily promise at a time, to begin to recreate that balance, to begin to reestablish, because not only our minds, our whole body can be trained, can be taught, can evolve, can change as we grow. So bad things happened, and they probably are still causing, and I talk about the body and all of the foundational practices to help our body regain that balance, and I can begin to make those choices to change my future. And it probably won't be overnight, though somewhere down the line. And then the beautiful thing that happens as you walk this journey, you actually empower yourself. So all of those beliefs and the limitations that I had too, I told myself, from the genetics that my family gifted me with, to even the personality characteristics. My whole family's uptight and anxious, so that's all I can be, is uptight and anxious, until I taught myself something else. Now, you and I were joking, right, about beforehand, and I'm like throwing peace signs, like calm person, right? So, there's more to me. So until you walk the journey of healing and change and transformation, a lot of us aren't going to believe we can do it. Gradually, however, over time, I don't even know when belief happened for me, but somewhere along the line, I began to believe I could. And that's the most empowering part of it. And I think that a lot of us have a lot of beliefs that are keeping us stuck, possibly, of the things that happened to me will always be with me, and they likely will. And there's still healing that can be done. And you can still make choices that can shift or change the way you experience your current reality.
Oh God, girl, you go deep onto so much of this in your book. So I desperately want everyone to share your book. So where can they find it?
Well, thank you. I'm smiling because those of you who will be reading my book, which comes out on March 9th, though it's pre-order now, How to Do the Work. Links, Amazon, Bookshop, a couple international links are available now. it's finally the first place where the whole theory of, mind, body, soul and healing is all in one place. And it just so happens to have a lot of narrative. So I go into my journey of healing, and obviously community members and clients. And I also made sure at the end of each chapter there's exercises and journal prompts. So it is a little bit of both. It's the content and the information with the story of how it applies in people's life, and then the really how-to. So I'm hoping this is a book that will live on for people. You can pick it up, read it, do some of the work, put it down, maybe revisit it, and have it take on a new life somewhere later. So how to do the work.
Love it. I'm so freaking excited, girl. Seriously. Where can people find you? Because your Instagram posts are bloody mind-blowing as well. So where can people find
Absolutely. The.holistic psychologist is where you will find me each and every day, putting out the healing content, doing the work of healing, connect with the amazing community of self-healers. So come join us.
Hell yeah. Guys, check out everything she does. She's got a book, she's got a YouTube channel, she's got Instagram, which is also fire. If you're not subscribed, guys, click the link below. And if you're not following me, follow me at Lisa Bilyeu. And until next time, guys, be the hero of your own life. Peace out. What up, guys? Thanks so much for watching this video. If you'd like another dose of badassery, make sure you watch this video right here or this one right here, because I know you'll like them. But hey, also, while you're here, guys, you might as well click that subscribe button down there so you don't miss any future episodes. And until next time, be the hero of your own life. Peace out.